The Lost Expedition, a journey into the heart of the Marañón. Dreams of wild rivers. Jarosław, Frąckiewicz, tightened the straps on his weathered backpack, the glint in his eyes reflecting years of adventure. Across the room, Celina Mróz inspected a map of South America, her finger tracing a jagged blue line that cut through the heart of the Peruvian Amazon. "This is it, Jarek," she said, with a smile that danced between excitement and reverence. "The Marañón River, they call it the Grand Canyon of the Amazon. Imagine the rapids, the wildlife, the untouched villages." Jarosław nodded, his gaze settling on her. He admired Celina's passion for exploration, a kindred spirit who, like him, felt most alive when far from the noise of cities and the predictability of routine. Together, they had traversed icy fjords in Scandinavia, paddled through the labyrinthine waterways of the Okavango Delta, and faced storms on New Zealand's wild rivers. But Peru was different. It wasn't just another destination, it was the culmination of years of dreaming and meticulous planning. The call of the unknown. Their shared love for kayaking had brought them together years ago during a wilderness retreat in Poland. Jarosław, a former journalist turned full-time adventurer, had been leading a group expedition, and Celina, a budding anthropologist with a thirst for cultural immersion, had been one of the participants. Their connection had been immediate, rooted in a mutual curiosity about the world and a relentless desire to push boundaries, geographical, physical, and emotional. For Jarosław, the idea of exploring Peru had been simmering ever since he'd read about the Marañón River, a vital artery of the Amazon basin, winding through steep canyons, dense jungles, and territories inhabited by indigenous communities. For Celina, Peru offered more than just natural beauty. It was a gateway to understanding cultures that had thrived for centuries, despite colonization, modern exploitation, and political unrest. Together, they envisioned a journey that would not only challenge their kayaking skills, but also allow them to connect with the spirit of the land and its people. Charting the journey, their plan was ambitious, a 3-month expedition starting in Lima, where they would acclimate and gather supplies before venturing into the Andean highlands to locate the headwaters of the Marañón. From there, they intended to follow the river's winding path, paddling through some of the most remote and uncharted regions of Peru. Along the way, they hoped to visit indigenous villages, learn about their traditions, and document the threats posed by illegal mining and deforestation, an issue close to Celina's heart. The couple had poured months into preparation, poring over satellite maps, researching local weather patterns, and training rigorously to ensure they were in peak physical condition. Jarosław's journalism background had secured them a modest sponsorship from a European travel magazine, which also expected an in-depth series chronicling their journey. Celina, meanwhile, had arranged meetings with anthropologists and environmentalists in Lima to gather insights and support. "Are you sure about this stretch here?" Celina asked one evening, pointing to a narrow section of the map. The area was marked with a faint warning, "Zona peligrosa." Jarosław shrugged. "It's just rumors, conflicts maybe, or territorial disputes. Nothing we haven't dealt with before." Celina frowned, but didn't press further. Both knew that every adventure carried risks, and the allure of the unknown always came with shadows, hints of danger. Despite their enthusiasm, a sense of unease lingered. News reports painted a picture of a region grappling with challenges: illegal logging operations, clashing with indigenous groups, sporadic violence linked to drug cartels, and communities struggling against environmental devastation. Friends and family voiced concerns. "Why not stick to established routes?" Celina's father had asked. "The Amazon is dangerous enough without going off the map." But neither Jarosław nor Celina could be dissuaded. To them, the journey was as much about confronting challenges as it was about discovery. "If we avoided danger altogether, we'd miss the world's most extraordinary places," Jarosław often said. Still, late at night, as the excitement of planning gave way to quiet contemplation, even he couldn't entirely dismiss the weight of their choice. Maps only told part of the story. What lay beyond the marked trails and tourist paths was a world they could only guess at, a world that might not welcome their intrusion. Dreams of the river. In the weeks leading up to their departure, Jarosław and Celina spent hours immersing themselves in the history and myths of the Marañón. They learned about its sacred significance to the indigenous peoples, its role as a cradle of life for countless species, and its modern-day struggles against encroaching industrialization. For Celina, the river became a symbol of resilience, flowing undeterred through centuries of change and conflict. "It's more than just water," she said one evening as they packed their equipment. "It's a lifeline, a story." Jarosław smiled, pulling her into a brief embrace. "Then we'll make sure we tell it." Final preparations. By the time they boarded the plane to Lima, every detail had been accounted for, except, of course, the unexpected. Their kayaks, custom built for navigating both tranquil streams and roaring rapids, were packed alongside essential supplies: dehydrated meals, medical kits, waterproof cameras, and a portable GPS tracker. Celina carried a notebook where she planned to sketch and document their encounters, while Jarosław had his trusty voice recorder for capturing interviews and observations. As the plane took off, a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation filled the cabin. They were leaving behind the familiar comforts of home and stepping into a world where every decision carried weight. For all their preparation, they knew that no amount of planning could fully account for what lay ahead, foreshadowing the unknown. Their arrival in Peru would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not only their skills, but also their resilience and trust in each other. Unbeknownst to them, the whispers of danger they had so easily dismissed would soon take shape, lurking in the shadows of the dense Amazonian jungle. Yet, in that moment, as they gazed out of the plane window at the sprawling Andes below, Jarosław and Celina were consumed by a singular thought: the thrill of adventure, the promise of discovery, and the call of the Marañón. Arrival in Peru and the start of the expedition. The plane landed with a jolt at Jorge Chávez International Airport, its cabin buzzing with the energy of disembarking passengers. As Jarosław and Celina stepped out into Lima's humid air, a sense of exhilaration washed over them. The sprawling capital stretched ahead, a chaotic blend of colonial architecture, bustling markets, and modern skyscrapers. This was the gateway to their adventure, a city that thrived on contrasts, much like the journey they were about to embark on. Discovering Lima, a city of layers. Their first days in Lima were a whirlwind of activity. Between gathering last-minute supplies and meeting local contacts, they allowed themselves moments to savor the city's vibrant culture. In Miraflores, they strolled along the cliffs, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the salty breeze mingling with the aroma of street food. In Barranco, the bohemian heart of Lima, they explored narrow streets adorned with colorful murals and dined on fresh ceviche, accompanied by chicha morada, a sweet purple corn drink. For Celina, these days offered a deeper connection to the people she hoped to understand. "Every detail here tells a story," she remarked, as they browsed a market filled with handmade textiles and intricate jewelry. "Look at this," she added, holding up a bracelet woven with the patterns of the Quechua people. Even the symbols carry meaning. Jarosław, meanwhile, found himself captivated by the juxtaposition of ancient traditions and modern struggles. His conversations with taxi drivers, street vendors, and guides often turned to the challenges facing Peru: the erosion of indigenous cultures, the environmental impact of industrialization, and the political tensions simmering beneath the surface. "Everyone has their battles," he said one evening, jotting notes into his travel journal. "But there's a resilience here. It's inspiring." Preparations and warnings. As they delved deeper into their preparations, Jarosław and Celina connected with the local kayaking community, a tight-knit group of enthusiasts who shared their passion for the country's wild rivers. One of them, a seasoned guide named Esteban, had agreed to help them navigate the initial stages of their expedition. Tall and wiry, with sun-weathered skin and a calm demeanor, Esteban exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had seen it all. "You two are brave," he said during their first meeting, his tone a mix of admiration and caution. "The Marañón is unpredictable, especially in the upper reaches. Landslides, sudden storms, even the river itself. It can turn on you in an instant." Celina nodded. "That's why we've been preparing for months. We know the risks." Esteban studied her for a moment before responding. "There's more to it than natural dangers. Some parts of the river are complicated, Not everyone welcomes outsiders. This cryptic warning lingered in their minds as they finalized their plans. At a small gear shop, tucked away in one of Lima's back streets, the shopkeeper echoed Esteban's concerns. "The jungle doesn't forgive mistakes," she said as she handed over a pair of waterproof bags, "and neither do the people who call it home." Despite the warnings, the couple remained resolute. The risks were part of the allure, a testament to the untamed beauty they sought to experience and document. Setting out into the Andes, a week after their arrival, Jarosław and Celina boarded a rickety bus bound for Cajamarca, a city nestled in the Andes where their journey would truly begin. The ascent was both breathtaking and nerve-wracking, the narrow mountain roads hugging cliffs that dropped into mist-shrouded valleys. As the bus creaked and groaned around sharp bends, Celina leaned her head against the window, watching the landscape transform. Terraced fields gave way to jagged peaks, their snow-capped summits glowing in the golden light of late afternoon. In Cajamarca, they met Esteban and loaded their gear onto a battered pickup truck that would take them to the river's headwaters. The journey was slow, the truck bouncing over uneven dirt roads that wound through remote villages. Along the way, they passed herds of llamas and alpacas grazing on steep hillsides and encountered locals who waved warmly as they passed. For Celina, these interactions were a highlight. She struck up conversations wherever she could, her Spanish fluent and her curiosity boundless. One elderly man, seated on a stone wall by the roadside, shared tales of the river's mythical origins. "They say the Marañón is alive," he told her, "a serpent that carved its way through the mountains, always moving, always watching. The river beckons." When they finally reached the river, it was everything they had imagined, and more. The Marañón stretched out before them, its waters shimmering under the midday sun. Towering cliffs rose on either side, their rugged faces streaked with mineral deposits that glinted like veins of gold. The sound of rushing water filled the air, a constant reminder of the river's power. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, taking it all in. Then, Esteban broke the spell. "It's time." They unloaded the kayaks and supplies, carefully packing everything for the journey ahead. Jarosław double-checked their waterproof camera and GPS tracker, while Celina secured her notebook and a pouch of hand-drawn maps. As they pushed off from the shore, the thrill of the unknown surged through them. The challenges begin. The first few days on the river were exhilarating. The current carried them swiftly through narrow canyons, the water churning with a force that demanded constant vigilance. Each bend revealed new wonders, hidden waterfalls, flocks of brightly colored parrots, and glimpses of wildlife drinking from the riverbanks. But the journey was far from easy. Navigating the Marañón required both skill and stamina. At times, the river seemed to taunt them, its calm stretches giving way to sudden rapids that threatened to capsize their kayaks. Esteban proved invaluable, his experience guiding them safely through the most treacherous sections. "Stay close," he shouted one afternoon as they approached a particularly turbulent stretch. "Follow my line exactly." Jarosław and Celina paddled furiously, their muscles burning as they fought against the current. When they finally emerged on the other side, soaked but unscathed, they exchanged triumphant grins. A shift in the atmosphere. As the days turned into weeks, the euphoria of exploration began to give way to a subtle but growing unease. It started with small, almost imperceptible signs, footprints near their campsite that didn't match their own, the faint smell of smoke drifting through the air when no fires were visible, and the feeling of being watched, probably just hunters or fishermen, Jarosław said one evening as they sat by the fire. But his tone lacked conviction. Celina, ever attuned to her surroundings, couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. "It's more than that," she murmured. "Whoever it is, they're staying out of sight on purpose." Esteban, usually calm and composed, seemed more cautious as well. He insisted on shorter stops and urged them to avoid making too much noise. "This part of the river isn't just remote," he explained one night. "It's contested. There are groups here who don't want attention. Illegal loggers, smugglers, maybe worse." A warning ignored. The first direct encounter came one afternoon when they stopped at a small village to restock their supplies. The locals, while polite, seemed wary, their answers to Celina's questions curt and guarded. As they prepared to leave, an older woman pulled Esteban aside and spoke to him in hushed tones. "What did she say?" Jarosław asked. When they were back on the water, Esteban hesitated before replying. "She said we should leave the area as soon as possible, that strangers aren't welcome here." Celina frowned. "But why? What's happening?" "She didn't say," Esteban replied, his expression grim. "And I didn't ask." The first ominous signs. That night, as they set up camp on a secluded riverbank, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of insects and birds replaced by an eerie stillness. Celina tried to focus on her sketches, but her mind kept wandering to the warning they had received. When they awoke the next morning, they found their campsite undisturbed, except for one thing. A crude symbol had been carved into a tree near the water's edge, its meaning unknown, but unmistakably deliberate. Jarosław studied it in silence before finally speaking. "Let's keep moving." Conflict and mysterious disappearance. The air around the Marañón felt heavier as they paddled further downstream. The dense jungle loomed over the riverbanks, its towering canopy blotting out much of the sunlight. The carved symbol they had found near their campsite lingered in their thoughts, unspoken but omnipresent. Even Esteban, usually unflappable, had grown more withdrawn, his eyes scanning the tree line with a wariness that wasn't there before. For Jarosław and Celina, the excitement that had fueled their journey began to waver. Celina, in particular, felt a creeping unease that no amount of logic could dispel. She had always trusted her instincts, and now they were screaming at her to turn back. But Jarosław remained steadfast. "We've come too far," he said one evening as they drifted on a calmer stretch of the river. "This is what we signed up for. We can't let fear stop us." Celina nodded, though her grip on the paddle tightened. A chance encounter. On the fourth day after leaving the village, they rounded a bend in the river and spotted a small group of people on the shore. At first, they seemed to be fishermen, shirtless men in tattered trousers, standing by a rickety canoe. But as the kayakers drew closer, the atmosphere shifted. The men stopped what they were doing and watched silently, their expressions unreadable. Esteban raised his hand in a gesture of greeting. "Buenas tardes," he called out. The men didn't respond. One of them, a broad-shouldered figure with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and said something in a language none of them understood. His tone wasn't overtly hostile, but there was an edge to it that made Celina's skin crawl. "We're just passing through," Esteban said in Spanish, his voice steady but firm. "No trouble." The scarred man exchanged glances with the others before nodding curtly. Without another word, they turned back to their canoe and resumed their tasks. Esteban urged Jarosław and Celina forward. "Don't look back," he muttered. Signs of pursuit. That night, they camped on a rocky island in the middle of the river, hoping the water would provide a buffer against unwanted visitors. Celina couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal call seemed amplified in the darkness. She sat by the dwindling campfire, sketching to calm her nerves, when she heard a faint splash. Her heart leapt into her throat as she strained her ears, but the sound didn't repeat. The next morning, they found fresh footprints in the sand near the water's edge, barefoot, human, and unmistakably recent. "They were here," Celina whispered, her voice shaking. Esteban examined the tracks with a grim expression. "They're watching us, testing us." Jarosław tried to downplay the discovery. "Maybe it's just curiosity. We're outsiders in their territory. Let's stay alert, but not jump to conclusions." Despite his reassurances, the tension was palpable. They packed up quickly and pushed off into the river, each stroke of the paddle feeling heavier than the last. Tensions escalate. Over the next 2 days, the signs of pursuit became more frequent. At one campsite, they found a crude spear embedded in the ground near their tents. Another time, Celina spotted a flash of movement in the undergrowth, too quick to identify, but unmistakably human. Esteban grew increasingly anxious, urging them to paddle faster and stop less frequently. "We need to get to safer waters," he said. "This part of the river is too isolated." But even as they tried to quicken their pace, the challenges of the Marañón made escape difficult. Rapids that jarred their bodies and threatened to overturn their kayaks slowed their progress. and the dense jungle offered no viable escape route on land. One evening, as they prepared to set up camp, they discovered their supply bag had been slashed. Nothing had been stolen, but the message was clear. They were being hunted. The night of the attack, the night they disappeared, began like any other. They had set up camp on a wide, sandy bank, surrounded by dense forest, choosing the site for its defensibility. Esteban had insisted on setting up a rotation for keeping watch, though none of them were confident they could fend off a determined attack. Jarosław took the first shift, sitting by the fire with his recorder in hand. He spoke softly into the device, documenting the day's events and the escalating threats they faced. "It feels like we're being herded," he said, "but to where and why, I don't know." Celina was next. She sat with her notebook, trying to distract herself by sketching the silhouettes of the trees against the moonlight. But as the hours dragged on, her exhaustion caught up with her. Her head drooped, and the pencil slipped from her fingers. She woke to chaos. Shouts erupted from the jungle, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. Before she could react, a group of figures burst into the campsite. They wore makeshift masks and carried crude weapons, machetes, clubs, and bows. Celina screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the attackers' guttural cries. Jarosław lunged toward her, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the river. Esteban shouted something in Spanish, his voice filled with panic. Before the sound of a struggle silenced him, Celina glanced back to see the firelight glinting off a machete, then darkness as the flames were extinguished. The last thing she remembered was the icy grip of the river as she and Jarosław plunged into its depths. Aftermath: an empty camp. When the first light of dawn broke over the Marañón, the campsite was eerily silent. The fire had been extinguished, the tents were slashed, and the kayaks lay abandoned on the shore. Of Jarosław, Celina, and Esteban, there was no sign. Later that day, a group of local fishermen stumbled upon the scene. They found only scattered belongings: a torn map, a waterlogged notebook, and a shattered voice recorder. The footprints leading away from the site disappeared into the dense jungle. Word of the disappearance spread quickly through nearby villages. Some speculated that the group had fallen victim to illegal loggers or smugglers who controlled parts of the river. Others whispered of retribution from indigenous tribes, angered by the intrusion into their sacred lands. But no one could say for certain what had happened. The search begins when local authorities were alerted. A search party was organized, though the effort was hampered by the region's remoteness and lack of resources. Helicopters scoured the riverbanks, and volunteers combed the jungle. But days turned into weeks with no breakthroughs. The fishermen who had found the camp shared their account with investigators, describing the signs of a struggle and the ominous carvings on nearby trees. One of the carvings resembled the symbol Jarosław, and Celina had discovered days earlier, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward, its meaning as inscrutable as ever. A growing mystery. Back in Lima, news of the disappearance reached the press, sparking international interest. Jarosław's travel magazine published a feature on the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about the perils of adventure tourism. Celina's colleagues in anthropology called for greater protections for researchers working in remote areas. But amid the outcry, questions remained unanswered. What had provoked the attack? Who were the masked figures that had ambushed the camp? And why had Jarosław and Celina, seasoned travelers with a deep respect for local cultures, been targeted? Unanswered questions. The search eventually slowed, though it never truly ended. For the families of the missing, every passing day was a reminder of what had been lost and of the tantalizing possibility that answers still lay hidden in the jungle. Rumors persisted of sightings, of travelers who claimed to have heard ghostly voices echoing through the canyons of the Marañón, calling for help. But for now, the Marañón kept its secrets, its waters flowing silently over the traces of what had been. Investigation and discovery of the truth. The disappearance of Jarosław, Frąckiewicz, Celina, Mróz, and their guide, Esteban, sent shockwaves through both local and international communities. For weeks, the story dominated headlines, each report adding to the growing intrigue and dread surrounding the fate of the travelers. In Lima, families of the missing arrived to demand answers, while in the region surrounding the Marañón River, Fear and speculation rippled through the villages, international attention and local reluctance. As word spread, pressure mounted on Peruvian authorities to act decisively. Journalists from Europe and North America descended on Lima, filing stories about the dangers of remote exploration. Environmental groups latched onto the story as a tragic example of the escalating tensions between illegal operations and indigenous rights. The Peruvian government, under scrutiny, pledged a full investigation, though local officials privately admitted the challenges. "The Marañón is vast," said one officer during a press briefing, "and the jungle doesn't give up its secrets easily." Meanwhile, villagers near the site of the disappearance were less forthcoming. When questioned, many avoided eye contact, muttering vague warnings about outsiders stirring trouble. "They should have stayed away," one elderly man told a reporter, shaking his head. "That river has spirits. It doesn't forgive." Competing theories emerge from the outset. Theories about the group's disappearance were as varied as they were alarming. Investigators initially suspected the involvement of illegal mining operations, notorious for their violent enforcement of territorial boundaries. The Marañón and its tributaries were known hotspots for unregulated gold extraction, where heavily armed groups operated with impunity. Another possibility was the drug trade. Sections of the river served as hidden routes for smuggling cocaine to international markets, and strangers passing through could easily be mistaken for spies or informants. However, some investigators considered a more localized conflict. Celina's notebook, recovered from the abandoned campsite, contained detailed notes about the region's indigenous communities. Had the group inadvertently trespassed on sacred land or unintentionally offended its guardians? Despite these theories, no conclusive evidence surfaced, leaving investigators to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. A breakthrough discovery. Weeks after the initial search had been called off, a breakthrough came in the form of a chance discovery. A team of environmental researchers conducting an unrelated survey downstream from the abandoned campsite stumbled upon a shallow grave hidden beneath a grove of trees. Inside were the remains of Esteban, his body marked by clear signs of violence. The discovery reignited the investigation, bringing a forensic team to the site. Near the grave, they found torn scraps of fabric, a shattered paddle, and, most chillingly, a crude effigy made from sticks and feathers, tied together with vines. The effigy was adorned with the same jagged circle symbol carved into trees near the campsite. "What does this mean?" asked one investigator. "Is it a warning? A message?" The symbolism puzzled authorities and stoked public fascination. Anthropologists speculated that the effigy might belong to a little-known indigenous belief system, though none could identify it with certainty. Others suggested it was a scare tactic employed by smugglers or miners to deter intruders, mounting pressure for answers. As the investigation progressed, pressure from the families of the missing grew unbearable. Jarosław's younger brother, Piotr, flew to Lima and became a fixture at press conferences, his pleas for justice striking a chord with audiences back home. "They were explorers, not criminals," he said during one emotional interview. "My brother and Celina dedicated their lives to understanding the world, not exploiting it. Someone must answer for this." Meanwhile, Celina's colleagues in anthropology published an open letter accusing the Peruvian government of failing to protect researchers and tourists. This tragedy highlights the need for greater respect and understanding between cultures, the letter read, but it also underscores the risks faced by those who dare to explore the unknown. Piecing together the final days with forensic evidence from Esteban's remains, investigators began reconstructing the events leading up to the group's disappearance. Esteban's injuries suggested he had fought back against multiple attackers, likely to protect the others. His grave's location, several kilometers from the campsite, indicated he had been taken alive, but later killed. Witness accounts from nearby villagers added another layer of complexity. Several locals reported hearing gunshots and shouting on the night of the attack. One woman claimed to have seen masked figures carrying torches near the river, though she refused to elaborate further. Authorities also analyzed Jarosław's voice recorder, recovered from the riverbed, although water damage rendered much of the audio unintelligible. Fragments of his final recordings hinted at growing tension One chilling excerpt captured his whispered words. "They're close. We can hear them in the trees. If anything happens..." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving investigators and family members haunted by the unfinished sentence. Theories converge. As evidence mounted, the investigation began to focus on two primary suspects, a local criminal network and a faction of indigenous people resistant to outside interference. A breakthrough came when a villager led authorities to a hidden encampment deep in the jungle. There, they discovered mining equipment, weapons, and items linked to the missing kayakers, including Celina's water bottle and a piece of Jarosław's torn jacket. Several men were arrested at the site, though they denied any involvement in the attack. Under questioning, one of them admitted to seeing the kayakers, but claimed they had been dealt with by a separate group, one operating outside the miners' control. Investigators were left with a chilling possibility. The kayakers had been caught in a crossfire between competing factions, each with motives to silence outsiders. The final discovery: months after the initial disappearance, the remains of Jarosław and Celina were discovered in a remote ravine near the river. Their bodies, like Esteban's, bore evidence of a violent end. Nearby, investigators found additional effigies and symbols carved into the rocks, reinforcing the belief that their deaths were tied to the region's darker undercurrents. Forensic analysis revealed that Jarosław and Celina had likely fled into the jungle during the attack, only to be captured days later. The location of their remains suggested that they had been deliberately left in an inaccessible spot, ensuring their story would remain untold. The motive unveiled. Through months of investigation, a disturbing narrative emerged. Jarosław and Celina had unknowingly ventured into a disputed area where illegal mining, smuggling, and indigenous land rights intersected. Their presence, while innocent, was seen as a threat. Perhaps they were mistaken for informants, or perhaps their documentation efforts were perceived as evidence gathering. The effigies and symbols, initially thought to be cultural markers, were determined to be tools of intimidation. While their exact meaning remained unclear, they spoke to the fear and mistrust that defined the region. Ultimately, the case concluded with the arrest of several individuals linked to the mining operation. Though many questions lingered, were these men the true culprits or scapegoats in a larger conspiracy? And what role, if any, did the indigenous community play in the tragedy? Reflections and regrets. For the families of the victims, the discovery brought both closure and anguish. Piotr returned to Poland with Jarosław's ashes, organizing a memorial service attended by hundreds of friends, colleagues, and fellow adventurers. Celina's parents, too grief-stricken to speak publicly, released a statement urging future explorers to consider the risks of venturing into uncharted territories. The international community responded with a mix of outrage and introspection. Travel organizations and researchers called for stricter safety protocols, while governments debated how to balance tourism with the protection of vulnerable regions. Legacy and unanswered questions. Though the case was officially closed, its legacy endured. Documentaries, articles, and books dissected every aspect of the tragedy, painting Jarosław and Celina as both victims and symbols of humanity's unquenchable thirst for discovery. Yet, for all the analysis, some questions remained unanswered. Who had carved the symbols that haunted their final days? What secrets had the Marañón hidden from view? And most hauntingly, could the tragedy have been avoided? The jungle, as always, remained silent. Final reflections and aftermath. Months after the discovery of Jarosław, Frąckiewicz, and Celina Mróz's fate, the world still grappled with the implications of their tragic story. While the official investigation had reached its conclusion, the events along the Marañón River continued to resonate deeply, not just with those who knew them, but also with adventurers, conservationists, and communities whose lives intersected with the untamed wilderness. The global fallout, the international reaction to the tragedy, was immediate and impassioned. Travel blogs and outdoor magazines debated the ethics of exploring remote regions, weighing the spirit of discovery against the risks to both travelers and local populations. Environmental organizations used the story to spotlight the dangers posed by illegal activities in the Amazon, calling for stricter enforcement and increased support for indigenous communities. The Marañón isn't just a river, one activist said during a televised debate. It's a battleground, one where lives, cultures, and ecosystems are at stake. Jarosław and Celina's story is tragic, but it's not unique. How many others have been lost in these struggles, their stories unheard? For many, the tragedy became a symbol of humanity's complex relationship with the natural world, a relationship defined by both awe and conflict. Yet, amid the calls for action, there were those who criticized the couple's decision to venture into such a dangerous area. They should have known better, one commentator argued. Adventure is one thing, but recklessness is another. Memorials and tributes. In Poland, a candlelit vigil was held for Jarosław and Celina, attended by a diverse community of adventurers, scholars, and friends. Stories of their kindness, determination, and passion filled the air, painting a vivid picture of lives dedicated to exploration and understanding. Piotr Frąckiewicz, Jarosław's brother, delivered a poignant eulogy. "My brother believed in the power of stories," he said, his voice steady. Despite the tears in his eyes, he believed that the world's most remote places held truths that could bring us closer together as humans. And Celina, she was the heart of their journey. Together, they showed us what it means to live with purpose, even when the risks are great. In Celina's hometown, her colleagues in anthropology organized a scholarship in her name, aimed at supporting students who sought to study indigenous cultures and advocate for their rights. "This is what she would have wanted," one professor remarked during the ceremony, "for her work to inspire others to tread carefully but courageously into the unknown." Reflections on risk and reward. The tragedy reignited debates about the ethics and responsibilities of explorers. Many saw Jarosław and Celina as heroes, pioneers, who had dared to confront the mysteries of the Marañón. Others viewed their journey as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers inherent in venturing into territories where cultural misunderstandings and geopolitical conflicts could have deadly consequences. In an editorial for a prominent travel magazine, a fellow adventurer reflected on the fine line between courage and recklessness. "We venture into the wild to feel alive," he wrote, "but we must also remember that these places are not empty spaces waiting to be discovered. They are homes, battlegrounds, and sacred lands. To explore responsibly is to respect those who came before us and those who remain." The jungle's silence. For those who lived along the Marañón River, the aftermath of the tragedy was both a relief and a burden. The increased scrutiny brought by journalists and investigators had disrupted the fragile balance of life in the region. Mining operations and smuggling routes were temporarily curtailed, and some local leaders took the opportunity to push for greater protections for their lands. But many residents remained wary of outsiders, their distrust heightened by the attention the case had brought. "The river is our lifeline," said one villager during a rare interview, "but it's also dangerous. Strangers come here thinking they can conquer it, but they don't understand its power." The symbols and effigies found near the site of the attack became the subject of both fascination and fear. Anthropologists speculated that they were tied to a long-forgotten tradition, perhaps a form of territorial warning or spiritual invocation. Yet, for all the analysis, their true meaning remained elusive, a reminder of the countless mysteries that the jungle continued to guard. Unfinished stories. Even with the case officially closed, many questions lingered. Were Jarosław and Celina targeted specifically, or were they simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was their attack the work of organized criminals, desperate to protect their operations, or a faction of indigenous people acting out of fear and mistrust? And what role did the symbols, those haunting, jagged circles, play in the events that unfolded? For Piotr and the families of the victims, these unanswered questions were a source of both frustration and closure. "We may never know the whole truth," Piotr admitted during a final interview with a Polish news outlet, "but I choose to focus on what we do know, that Jarosław and Celina lived fully, with passion and purpose. Their story doesn't end with their deaths. It lives on in the people they touched, the causes they championed, and the lessons they leave behind. A legacy of exploration. Despite its tragic ending, the story of Jarosław and Celina inspired a new generation of explorers and conservationists. Their detailed notes and recordings, salvaged from the river, provided invaluable insights into the challenges facing the Marañón region. Documentaries and books chronicled their journey, framing it as a testament to the enduring human spirit and the complex realities of exploring uncharted territories. In one such documentary, titled The Spirit of the River, a narrator reflected on their legacy. The Marañón took them, but it also revealed them through their courage and curiosity. Jarosław and Celina showed us what it means to confront the unknown, not with fear, but with open hearts and minds. The open ending, the final chapter of their story, remains unwritten, though their remains were recovered and their deaths partially explained. The jungle's secrets continue to loom, tantalizing and inscrutable. Some adventurers whisper of retracing their path, determined to uncover the truths that eluded investigators. Others choose to leave the mystery intact, respecting the Marañón as a place where human understanding will always meet its limits. For Jarosław and Celina, the river was both a destination and a journey, a place where dreams collided with reality, beauty coexisted with danger, and life proved both fragile and profound. Their story is not just one of loss, but of connection, courage, and the enduring allure of the unknown.